Anyway, Andrew walks up, and there I am with my Winfield Red tucked up in my sleeve, my DBs on, my black shirt, AC/DC, and black jeans and that. And I think Andrew's just got, oh, what have I got myself into here? What have I got myself into here? Anyway, we started yakking, and he says, oh, I hear you're a good pool player, Gaz. I said, yeah, I am actually. He says, well, let's go and play some pool. So we become good friends, and he helped me out quite a lot over my teenage years. And then we lost contact for years. And I always wondered what happened to Andrew, always wondered what happened, you know.
I think really the Signs of Safety begins with my family in York, because my dad was a minister who just believed in always paying attention to the poorest people.
The genesis for my part in Signs of Safety probably goes back to my days in Halls Creek as a welfare officer. That was where and that was in the 1970s. And that was probably when I learnt the importance of partnership.
In my teenage years, I start working with street kids, with some church people, and realise all of these kids are homeless, and it's come out of child abuse. And then by the time I do social work in my 20s, I knew how to relate to these kids. But, you know, you could relate to them one-on-one, but social workers never last. And, I'd meet their parents or something, I couldn't work with them.
My Aboriginal colleagues and the Aboriginal families that I was working with were very clear to me that they didn't have the answers, they didn't have the solutions. They'd say to me, you got to go and talk to that mob. You got to go and sit down with them, find out what's going on and figure it out with them. And many times the women would say to me, oh, and you got to talk to the grandparents.
Because Steve asked Andrew way back, in the early 90s, what is it you're doing with these families? And then Andrew's like, well, come and watch me. And then because of the conversations they had, it grew. And then because of the conversations, that Barbara and I had with Cheryl, and Terry went to the launch, and, all these incidental things happened, and here we are, and that's quite amazing.
We had very similar ideas and worked hard on the structure, on the questions, on the whole notion of how to apply solution-focused brief therapy to child protection work, and we shifted the conversation from protection to safety.
I just love the model. I love the group. I was there to mostly provide the basic solution-focused type or solution-oriented type skills, which are a heart of it. And I will say I was impressed that Steve and Andrew always kept that piece. They didn't try to take any shortcuts and say, well, let's just go to the board and do this. It's like, okay, you got to spend the time. You got to get the details here. And with the solution-focused approach, you could get the strength-based. You could get the protective factors as opposed to just the danger risk factors, which everybody else was getting. And you weren't getting cooperation with the family when you kept telling them, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're just doing this wrong, and this is what you got to do. For the first time, asking the family themselves what they saw as the solutions, I think was a monumental type thing.
Steve said, if we do this, we'll change the world. And I sat there and I remember looking at Steve going, really? He said, yeah, because this will change the whole way people think about the business. If we can do these things, do the work with these people here in WA and get more projects over time, and then if we can get it into a book and get it published internationally, that will change the whole game.
And I was wanting a model where we could apply that systemic approach to the child protection work that we were involved in. And I heard through the grapevine that Andrew and Steve themselves had already started off investigating a more systemic approach to child protection work. Now, the risk was taken from two perspectives. One is from a personal theoretical base. I understood signs of safety. I could see the benefits of it. I really couldn't see the risks because we could still apply child protection principles as well as the signs of safety model. So in my view, the risk wasn't as great as perhaps other people thought it was. And the second reason for taking the risk is that the staff were on site. The people who were going to practice the child protection work were wanting to try something different.
One of my colleagues at the time was at a conference and came across this book called The Signs of Safety and came back with it and said, what do you think about this? And we all read it. And it was what I loved about it straight away was it filled a gap. It filled a massive gap for us.
It was a rare combination at the time of both theory and careful practice. Most of family therapy at that time, which is cited a lot in the book, was a systemic background. And then a lot of people were applying solution-focused ideas in various areas, including child safety. But he put the two of them together.
I was really intrigued by the approach. It seemed to me to get at the complexity of child protection. So it incorporated a strength perspective in a field that is usually deficit-based and adversarial.
It's very different. He has a very different vision. This is life-saving. This isn't just something that helps people feel better. People die if we don't do this well. People might be alive if we do it well. And he holds that close. He really holds that close.
And I started to go into other local authorities to help them think through how they might start to introduce this model within theirs. And so that was the real springboard. And then it just went, it just started to roller coaster.
That presentation in Cardiff in 2002, he did, that was, that changed my working life.
But once we hit critical mass, everybody wanted us everywhere in the world. And I was just struggling to keep things going.
We got up to, I think, about 52 trainers and consultants worldwide. And I was one of those, but I was different in the sense that I worked for resolutions, whereas the other trainers and consultants were their own businesses in themselves that contracted to resolutions.
It was fascinating because we held the first Signs of Safety gathering in Gateshead, which is where I was working. And it was hilarious in a way because we hosted it, but actually none of our senior managers knew what it was.
Wow, the gathering is like, it's so much energy, it's so much party, it's so much, it would be the closest, maybe this sounds a bit strange, but for me it's like a rock festival, but for child protection professionals.
Yeah, the gatherings, there's nothing like them. There's a real buzz of excitement, a real energy, bringing all these practitioners from around the world together to share examples of where they've applied this approach and it's worked really well. And it's made a difference for the families. I think, most of us get in this job because we want to make a positive difference.
You asked me what I like in Signs of Safety. That's very simple. It's a skill-based, a deeply human approach. And it's respecting people, and he loves the parents and children. And so it is very simple. You have to learn the skills. It's skills-based. It's skills, and skills.
In a way, it's very simple, and but it's what works for the professionals. I think that's why they like the mapping part of Signs of Safety so much. getting the information we have and need organized in a way so we sort of get an overview. What do we already know? What do we need to know? What more do we need to know? What more questions do we need to ask the family and the network?
And I think yes, everyone's so impressed and inspired for using that science safety. I think yes, that is great. And the things that I like most is the tool is so simply, very simple, easy to use.
I remember going to training with Andrew, and he would say, we're not the experts, the family is the expert, and families are the arbiters of our best practice. And I think they're things that I think ring true from the first time I heard them to now, because we are not the experts in someone else's trauma.
But what I've seen in the last year working with Andrew in this space is sitting those same concepts, that same model in an Aboriginal corporation where the organisation has been built to heal the community, to empower the community to self-determine a future. It can look radically different.
And just putting that responsibility back on those families and saying, all right, mum's not so good, she's not so well, she can't look after the kids. However, come on, family, get around this child, get them safe, and then we don't have to worry.
How do you do this work in a context that is the broader context of the system, the public expectations, how the leadership operates? It's like a whole system approach to this, that the practitioner in that context is able to do their work and be supported in a way that helps them make the best decisions.
Back then, most people say science of safety wouldn't work in Japanese context. And then they said it doesn't work for the sexual abuse cases, and always met the challenge. And then always it's the practitioners in the field that overcome the challenge with the really good practice.
There's an expression that I've relearned over and over again, and that is that sometimes when you want to change your destination, you have to start from a different place. And science of safety allowed us to start from a different place. It allowed us to start from a more positive, productive place. It allowed us to start with the assumption that families were protecting their children most of the time, that children had a whole network of people that cared about them and loved about them, and that as a child protection agency, we didn't have to be in this hypervigilant surveillance role. In fact, the reality is we could not be effective in keeping children safe if we remained in that role.
At the heart of it is that belief in humanity. I think there's something fundamental about the approach. And I think that's what rings through in any jurisdiction, whoever owns it. There is something about the belief that human beings have the capacity to grow. There's hope, there's an ability to improve, even in the worst of situations, and in the most terrible situations where we find children and parents and families at times in crises. There's an inherent belief in the approach that we can support people to find that thing inside of them that can allow them to grow beyond that and get back to maybe a place of better functioning, better happiness, whatever that may be for that family.
Like most things, little things grow to big things, and I think this is one of those things. And I'm so pleased to have been part of the little thing that enabled it to grow into something much bigger. And the little things we did was to give science of safety a chance to develop. And after 30 years, it's there.
Science of safety started off with Andrew and me, but science of safety is not ours, it's everybody's now who's had a hand in it, and I thank them for that.
I think you can look back now and look at all that's been achieved and be comfortable with that legacy. Even though I know that Andrew and probably Steve as well wouldn't be. But the legacy as it stands is a great one.
And I always wondered what happened to Andrew, always wondered what happened, you know. And then Facebook come along, and I looked at Andrew Turnell, and there he was, sitting with his, and he hadn't changed an iota. So I texted him, I said, oh, this is Gary May, I don't know if you remember me. And anyway, you know, a couple of weeks later, anyway, I waited, and he didn't answer, so I said, oh, well, sorry that you don't want to get into contact with me, but you know, I'd really love to get in contact with you. And it come back, don't you dare, you know, God, sorry Gaz, I've just been so busy, I go overseas a lot. Anyway, from that day on, I've called him a brother, and he is. He's like a brother to me now. I love Andrew to death. He's a great guy. He's been awarded this medal because he deserves it. He deserves 3 after looking after me anyway. He deserves 4 maybe. But no, I love him, and he'll always be a part of my life, and hopefully I'll always be a part of his.